Welcome. Have you ever tried sliding your notebook across your desk only for it to stop before it even reaches the edge? Or maybe you have wondered why it is so much harder to push a box on the floor than a smooth table? Today, we'll be uncovering the invisible force that is responsible for this everyday movement. What do you think the force is? Yeah, it is friction. Let's get into it. What is friction? Friction is the resisting force encountered when one surface slides over the other. This force acts along the tangent of the surface of contact. It can also be seen as the force that resists relative motion between two surfaces in contact. Friction opposes what? Relative motion between two surfaces in contact. You can take a look at it. When you are rubbing your two palms together, you experience there's a particular force making it difficult somehow for you to rub the hands. It's not that smooth. Like you will not be able, like you are not really comfortable with rubbing it. You feel some kind of restriction. That is frictional force in action. Frictional force is very important and prominent in our day-to-day activities. Without frictional force, you will have not been able to do a lot of things you are doing. For example, holding your pen, it will have been impossible without friction because the pen will just be slipping away from your hand without friction. Walking to school, doing a lot of things, it will have been extraordinarily difficult without friction. Now, let's continue. Basically, there are two types of friction. We have the static friction or the what? Or the kinetic and the kinetic friction. The static friction can also be reversed to as the limiting friction. This is the force, the amount of force that is required to set a stationary body into motion. It is the frictional force experienced by a body that is not in motion, but it is the frictional force experienced by a body that is static, that is not moving at all. While dynamic or kinetic friction is that frictional force experienced by a body already in motion. Usually, it is experienced that kinetic friction is usually greater than static friction. You can try this. Try to move a box. You will notice that the amount of force you are going to apply before the box starts moving, it will be greater compared to the what? Compared to the one you are going to apply to keep the body moving. That is confirming that what? The coefficient of static friction is usually greater than that of kinetic friction. Now, let's take a look at the laws of solid friction. These are the laws that explain what we experience with friction in our everyday life. The first one states that the friction between two surfaces always opposes relative motion. Take a look at the example of pushing a box. You are pushing the box forward, but you will experience a particular force that is acting in the opposite direction. Like that is not making it possible for you to push the box until the force you are applying is greater than that particular force. The box will not move. That force is what? It is frictional force. It is acting in the opposite direction. Number two, provided the normal reaction is constant, friction is independent on the surface area of contact. Once there is contact between the two bodies, friction does not depend on the surface area. Whether the surface area of contact is large or it is small, friction will always be experienced. Frictional force is dependent on the nature of the surface. Have you ever wondered why walking with a slippers on a wet tile floor, you have a higher probability of slipping compared to walking on a rough floor? Why? It's because of the nature of the surface. The smoother the surface, the lower the amount of friction you are going to experience, and the rougher the surface, the greater the amount of friction you can experience. Therefore, friction is dependent on the nature of the surface of contact. When the surface is smooth, the friction is less, and when the surface is rough, the friction is higher. The frictional force is directly proportional to the normal reaction. Frictional force is directly proportional to the normal reaction. This is where we derive the formula for friction from. Since this is telling us that the frictional force we are going to experience is directly proportional to the normal reaction that can be represented with R or N. Let's take it as R. Therefore, if we remove this proportionality sign, we are going to have our F equals to what? K R. Since the R is recognized as the coefficient of friction and represented with the sign mu, we can say our frictional force is equals to mu R. Keep this, we are still going to come back to it when we get to the calculation under friction. And the last one on the laws of solid friction is that the coefficient of kinetic friction is independent of the relative velocity between the two bodies. Whether the relative velocity is greater or it is less or it is moderate, the coefficient of kinetic friction is independent of it. That is, it will always be constant whether the relative velocity is increasing, decreasing, or it is also constant. Now, let's take a look at the advantages of friction. The advantages of friction span over different activities, which include locomotion. Without friction, it will have been extraordinarily difficult for you to move. One will just be slipping and falling down. Also, holding of objects will have been extraordinarily difficult without friction. Friction also helps in tightening of bolt and nut as well as undoing them. Also, friction prevents a lot of accidents on our road due to its application in the braking system of vehicles. Although, as you know, there's not a thing that has advantages that doesn't have the other side also. So friction also has disadvantages. Now let's take a look at the disadvantages of friction. The disadvantages of friction include the production of unnecessary heat. Take a look at rubbing your hands together. You will notice that with time your hand gets warmer due to the heat produced by the friction. Friction also reduces efficiency. Taking a look at our machines, for example, the amount of energy we are inputting into the machine is for the machine to produce a meaningful work. But out of the energy, friction will convert some of them into heat, which is not producing any useful work for us. It is just a form of energy lost. Thereby, friction reduces the efficiency of our machine. Due to the production of heat, it causes loss of energy also. And also, have you ever wondered why it is that after few months or few weeks you started using a new slippers, it gets smoother? The sole gets smoother with time. Why? It's because of friction. It causes wear and tear. Friction also causes wear and tear. It causes it in machine, in almost everything. Friction causes wear and tears. Now let's quickly take a look at the method of reducing friction. All methods of reducing friction base their application on the nature of the surface. They try to reduce the roughness of the surface in order to reduce friction. The first method is by streamlining the body, making the body smooth. That will reduce the friction, the effect of friction on the surface. Also, we can use ball and rollers bearing. We can also polish the surface. Polishing the surface will make it smoother, thereby reducing friction. Also, we can use lubricant. We can apply lubricant like grease on the surface. That will also make it smoother and make it easier for us to move, for the bodies in contact to move against each other.